Hi, I'm Angela Wolf. I'm a fashion designer and online instructor, and I'm going to give you a few ideas for color blocking. And I'm not talking about the traditional, which is similar to this pink, where you just take different pieces of your pattern and cut it out of a different color. What about piecing and creating your own fabric? This is very much like quilting, although you get to wear it. These little pieces in here, inside, those would be really challenging to stitch inside, like just have little squares and stitch in. So I'm going to show you how to piece together fabric and create a color blocking look. So here I have my pattern, and you can see this red line here. This is the pattern for the color blocking for the front of that dress. I literally cut this on the fold, and after I made my piece of fabric, that's what I cut out. Now when you're doing the piecing, you're going to want to create the fabric in a large, much larger section than this, because it really shrinks up. Let me just give you a little idea of just how much it shrinks up. This here is the actual pattern for what you see on that dress. That's a taped up mess. And why is it all taped back together? Because you have to remember how to sew it back together. But let me just take that back to the dress and look at the difference. If I line this up at the bottom, after I made this fabric, that's how much it shrank. So in your mind, think, I'm going to need to give myself a lot of extra room widthwise and lengthwise. One more thing I just want to show you on this crinkled up pattern here. I have it numbered. I'm just going to give you a small example of how to do this, but I have this numbered in order of sewing. So you can see up here, if you can see my scribble, but it's 1A, 2A, 3B, 4B. So what is the letters? That doesn't make any sense, right? Well, what I do is I separate each section that I have to sew by letter, and I number the pieces so I know how many pattern pieces there are. But after I started numbering up here, I realized, wait a minute, I can't sew all these pieces together. I need to start at the bottom. And then you see 7, 8, 9, all the way up. And why is this? Well, these pieces here, this one, all of these can be sewn together on each of these seams. And then we need to connect it to here and then to here. It's like a puzzle. So if you're really nervous, don't make your design too complicated. So I'm just going to make a small design here. Just grab a ruler, a curved ruler. It doesn't have to be completely straight. And come up with the design. How do you want this to be? And I'm actually going to start at the top with the design. That one was very interesting because I just started with little lines. Let's say one here. You can just start with a couple of longer lines. Now that would be just 3 pieces. That would be very easy to do. You would sew this piece to this piece, that section to this section, and that section to this section. You never want to sew a piece. If you only sewed this to this, like this, that was a lot of thises. If you sewed this here, you would end up with this open seam here, and you'd have to somehow piece in this section. So what I'm saying is you need to have a full line sewn together, whatever your design is. So let's keep going on this. And if you want, add a few pieces to the inside. And the neat part is once you start piecing everything together, if you decide, oh, I got up this far, wait a minute, I want more color in here. Well, even if you've already sewn half of this section, you can still add a few more lines. There's our piece. Okay, next you need to do, make sure you have a few different color of Sharpies. This red line on the outside is the fabric that I'm making. This is the grain line. So you need to go through, and I'm not going to do all of these, but you'll understand. I'm lining up the grain line, and each piece I want to make sure that I have a grain line on, just so I know how to cut this. And it's safe to have that anyway, so I know that all the purple lines are going to be the grain line. I'll do one more. And you'll have to do quite a few of these because you need to make sure that every single piece gets hit with the grain line. Get the idea? So what's underneath this paper here? Well, I've got paper and I've got 2 pieces of fabric. Now this is not the time to be a little bit frugal on the fabric, and this is why. You could either make 2 dresses or you can just make one and throw out the scraps. But it is so much easier to cut this apart with the 2 pieces of fabric than to have to cut out all these little pieces, pin them onto fabric, and then cut them out. You will save a day's worth of work. So here's our pieces. Now let's kind of figure out how this is going to be sewn together. I'm not going to draw in the rest of the grain lines because it'll just kind of clog this up. Let's see, what could be sewn together? There's a lot of weird marks in here. Well, here's one long line. And when I say that, I mean from tip to tip, I can finish this. If I sew this, we're going to call this 1A, and we're going to call this 2A. These 2 are going to be sewn together first. And it looks like there's another long line here. So let's call this 3A. No, that's a B. Sorry, we're going to the next section. And 4B. So I can sew these 2 together right here, and I'm just going to put a little mark here to remember that these are sewn together. If you were going to cut out all of these pieces, then you're going to need to add a seam allowance. But we're not doing that. So now, because these are sewn together and these are sewn together, I have one solid line here, meaning I can sew this together next. So you get the idea as you go through here. For example, this is one long line. So I could sew these 2 together, but then I would need to combine all of these pieces first and then sew them to here. So just kind of piece your pieces together, and if you notice that if you sewed these 2 together and then attach it to here and you have an opening from here to here, something went wrong. So go back and figure out what you need to attach. So I'm just going to cut out a little bit here. A rotary cutter is your best friend here. Make sure it's sharp though. I'm just going to cut. Now, when you get to these points, you have to be very careful that you don't cut through. Now you're making your own fabric, so if you end up with a little snip here, maybe move this line over a little bit. It's not the end of the world because we're going to make your pattern fit to the fabric instead of the fabric fit to your pattern. I'm just going to cut up a little bit more. Now I'm not going to cut this whole thing, but I'm going to just take these pieces that I've already marked just to show you how I sew these. And one thing I did not mention is what color do you want to go where? You can either label your pattern or do it visually as you go along, which is what we're going to do right here. I'm cutting out a few more pieces. Okay, so you can see why, first of all, you need to mark everything. And one more thing I didn't mention, sometimes I'll take a quick photo with my phone just to see how everything's laid out. This one, I took a photo. You see there are all the grain lines and all the numbers. Now, I'm just going to take these pieces here, knowing that these 2 are going to be sewn together. I'm just going to put a little marker so you can see. And these 2. Now, do you want green? That looks pretty cool. So instead of having to worry about your design, you just do it here visually. Or maybe you wanted to do it the reverse. So I'm going to take this piece here and sew it. And then I'm going to take this piece here and sew it. I'm just going to start with a straight stitch. Again, I put a little purple mark on each of these just so you could keep track, but you would actually pin these together. I'm going to use a contrasting thread just so you can see, and I'm using a very, very, very small seam allowance, like 1/8 or 2/8 of an inch, just enough to cover both seams without any shredding. Very small. Okay, there's one piece, and then here's our other. Now you really don't have to worry say one piece wasn't cut perfectly straight or something happened, it doesn't matter. You're creating your own fabric and you're going to cut your pattern from this, remember? So if it's a little bit skewed, don't worry, as long as it looks good from the front. So we have two pieces. We need to press them. Press the seam allowance one direction. Do not press it open. If you're wondering which way to press everything, when you have your pieces, if you had more connected here, you would want to press the direction furthest away from your seams. So if you have 3 seams, press towards the 1 seam. All right, let's go back over here. Let's see what we have. There we go. So this is how this is going to be sewn. So we had, this was our A section, and this was our B section. Now, this isn't quite straight. I'm just going to grab my scissors and trim that. You want a straight line to sew. Remember, I said it's okay if it's a little bit skewed because you're making your own fabric. So just flip that over. But before we do that, let me show you a couple stitches. Quilting stitches that connect pieces. Every machine has a different variety. This one is one of my favorites. This is what I did on the dress. Now you could use a contrasting thread or one that matches. Show you what this one looks like. And what I'm doing is the needle's going right down that seam, and then when I pull this off, you'll see how it evens out. See how fun that is? That's exactly what I did to the black dress. So because I have such a minuscule seam allowance, I'm able to do this and it looks like the pieces are pieced together. Just want to show you one more stitch. That's a connecting stitch. So I guess you would kind of call this fake piecing. I'll just do a few here. And there's another one. That one's really fun. That would be a great one out of a different color. Or even if you used a cream or a teal thread, then it would kind of show off on each side. So that's all there is to that. And now, I'm not going to sew this together, but you're getting the idea. So now you would piece together every section, sew them together, and do this little top stitching on each one. And when you're finished, you end up with a great design. But the one thing you need to keep in mind is if you have to pin the paper to each one, just to remember what you're sewing together, because I'm looking at this saying, wait a minute, I don't remember what gets sewn together now. Well, what I would do is go back to my pattern, lay this on top of my pattern pieces, and make sure they match. Let's go back to our pattern, and I hope you see how important it is to mark your pattern pieces really well, because when I had these over there, I couldn't tell which end was supposed to sew to which. So here's my 1A, 2A. That looks like that marks up, and that's the 3B, 4B. So this would start the design just like this. Now what I like to do is tape my pieces back together just so I can keep track of what's going on. But pay attention to one thing here. These two pieces, when they're sewn together, it's going to be a little bit of extra room. Remember, it doesn't matter because when this is all finished, you're going to cut out your original design. So this would make a really fun, once you have this pattern, this is a fun skirt. If you had different fabric piecings in each section with one solid color, that's great. Or let's go back to the dress. Again, you can kind of get together how these designs came together. This was just one small section and everything else was pieced in. If you can see the stitching, I chose to use black so it blends in. So I hope this gives you some great ideas to do a really new idea for color blocking, create your own fabric by quilting.